Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Injury Law Pod. I am your host, Eric Bartlett, and this is the podcast where we talk about all things personal injury law related. And I am a 28-year personal injury lawyer, and we try to break everything down, make it simple, interesting, and help the listener gain better understanding of personal injury law. Today, we're talking bicycles and pedestrians. Now, recently, we talked about May being Motorcycle Awareness Month. May is also National Bicycle Month. And again, same reasoning, May brings warmer weather. People are getting out, they're riding bikes, they may be commuting to work by bicycle. They're also going to be out walking more. It's just a good time to take a minute, focus in, bring awareness to the fact that others are out there sharing the roadways with us when we are driving in our vehicles. And obviously, if care is not taken, accidents can happen, serious injuries can follow. And so we just want to take a minute, slow it down, bring awareness to all of these things so that everybody can coexist on the roadways and hopefully avoid some terrible situation that could happen. So, again, National Bike Month is a time to celebrate cycling, encourage alternative transportation, and spotlight safety issues. At the end of the day, if we utilize our bicycles, I have personally commuted to my office at various times in life by bicycle. It's a great way to fit exercise into a daily routine. It makes you feel great when you get to the office and you've knocked out a 30-minute ride. And it's just obviously positive for health, also for reducing vehicles on the roadways, energy consumption, all those things. So we want to talk about today how pedestrian and bike safety intersect with personal injury law, especially here in Missouri. So, National Bike Month was established in 1956 by the League of American Bicyclists. And the goal was to promote bicycling for commuting, recreation, and health. Increased bike usage equals increased risk of infrastructure lacking or drivers being negligent. And nationwide, there has been a rise in bicycle and pedestrian fatalities, particularly after COVID. And according to 2022 National Highway Transportation and Safety Administration data, pedestrian deaths are up 13% here in the Midwest. Now, particularly here in Missouri, we've got over 1,000 pedestrian injuries and around 100 fatalities annually. And what are the top cities for these? Kansas City, St. Louis, and Springfield. And probably not surprisingly, because those are the three biggest cities in Missouri. So it's important to keep in mind that bicyclists have the same rights and responsibilities as cars. Missouri law sets that out very clearly. There's a statute. And so bicycles do have the right to be out on the roadways. And we've got to share the road. That's one of the things that the government puts out. You'll see signs about sharing the road. And again, in our very hectic, fast paced life, when we're in cars, we already know road rage is a real deal. And it does seem like bicycles can attract road rage from vehicles. And sometimes, unfortunately, bicyclists don't exercise appropriate etiquette on the roadways and they do anger drivers. So it's on both sides. Everybody needs to be responsible when they're sharing the roads. Now, as far as pedestrians are concerned, they absolutely have the right of way. when they are in marked or unmarked crosswalks. And we have to remember that. And again, as a pedestrian, it's not smart to just step out and start crossing the road in front of an oncoming vehicle. But if a pedestrian is in a crosswalk and you're approaching in a car, you have the obligation to stop and let that pedestrian safely cross the street. Now, there is no statewide helmet law for adults for bicycles, but some cities, like for example, Columbia, have local ordinances requiring helmet usage if you're going to be riding your bike on a city street. And again, there's no Missouri state law that mandates bike lane use. Cyclists, again, can use the roadways. But of course, if there's a dedicated bike lane or a bike path, the wise decision there as a bicyclist is use it, because then you're removing yourself from the roadway. You're removing the risk of an encounter with a vehicle. And it's interesting to note Missouri, I've talked about this in previous episodes. Missouri is a comparative fault state. And what that means is even if somebody shares in the fault of an accident and they're hurt, they can make a claim for those injuries. So that's an interesting part of the law. And specifically with pedestrians or bicyclists, if they have some fault in the accident, they still may be able to make a claim against a driver if an accident ensues and they get hurt. So what are some of the common legal issues that we see in pedestrian and bike accidents? First, if we're looking at a potential claim, we're going to be looking at who's at fault, right? Was it the driver? Was it the pedestrian, the cyclist? Was it the city or municipality? Was there something about the roadway design, about the signage, something like that might put responsibility on the city? But again, there's a whole bunch of factors that go into figuring out who exactly is responsible for the accident. And that's always a very first investigative element that we have to undertake if somebody is calling us, reaching out to us about an injury, if they were hurt as a bicyclist or a pedestrian. So some examples of claims that we've seen with bicyclists or pedestrians are situations where a car has failed to yield to a pedestrian in a crosswalk, or somebody opens their door as a bicyclist is coming by them. The good rule for bicyclists is always leave plenty of room between you and a parked car as you pass them, because you don't know if somebody's just going to open that door and cause this collision and obviously cause you injury. But again, as a person that's exiting the car, you need to make sure if you're parked on the side of the street and you're going to get out of your car, you need to make sure there's no cars coming. You need to make sure there's no bicyclists, or even for that matter, any pedestrians that are coming up alongside you. Because again, if you open your door, you don't look, you cause an accident, you could be responsible if it injures somebody. And of course, always, I've talked about it numerous times, distracted or drowsy driving, that can absolutely cause a problem. You're driving down the road, you get that text or whatever you need to do, you think on your phone, and you look away for that split second and bam, you hit somebody. A terrible situation to be in. And again, we just always emphasize, is that text, is that phone notification, whatever it is it worth it? Taking your eye off the road for that split second, that can be the difference between a safe ride home or a huge problem. And finally, we see sometimes poor sidewalk or bike lane design. We also see obviously dangerous sidewalks, things like that, the sidewalks that are in need of repair, or again, just the overall design of roadway and what is all involved in that. I did a previous episode on that issue, the efforts to create bike-friendly roadways. And so if you're interested, you can find that in the history of the podcast. The problem is, just like motorcycle accidents, a lot of times the injuries that occur to pedestrians and bicyclists are severe. There's not a lot of protection for them out there. And brain injuries, whether it's concussion or more serious, fractures, spinal damage, all of those are possible when bikes or people come into contact with vehicles. Another thing that's always important, and I can never emphasize it enough, is insurance. Again, if you're going to be out on the roadways, whether it's on bike, whether it's as a pedestrian, you want to make sure that you have the appropriate and the necessary insurance coverage to protect you just in the event that whoever causes the accident doesn't have insurance or doesn't have enough insurance. This is the cool thing. If you own a vehicle and you have uninsured or underinsured coverage on your auto policy, it will cover you as a pedestrian or a bicyclist in the event there's an accident. The other thing is something called medical payments coverage or medical expense coverage. It's no fault insurance on your own policy to pay medical bills. And again, if you're on the roadway on a bicycle as a pedestrian and you get hit, you can use that med pay coverage for medical treatment that you're getting, even though you weren't in your car. So those things follow you. And it's obviously crucial that you have that because, again, we live in a world, I see it every day, where people don't have enough insurance or they're driving around with no insurance. And when that happens, you've got to be prepared to protect yourself. Because again, if you're out there on the bike, you're out there on foot, the injury to you could be substantial and you cannot count on somebody else. Because here's the reality. If somebody doesn't have insurance, they don't have the assets to compensate you for your medical bills, for your lost wages, for everything you're going through, potentially future medical care. You've got to take the efforts ahead of time to make sure in the event something like this happens, you're going to be protected. Very important issue with any claim that you might have against a city, a municipality, some governmental agency about a defective nature of a roadway, of signage, something like that. You generally have to provide the governmental entity notice under Missouri's sovereign immunity statutes. What is that? That's just basically the laws that say, generally speaking, a government isn't liable in the personal injury world, but there are exceptions. And in those statutes, that's where this notice requirement comes out. And if you don't give notice after an injury and you believe a governmental entity is responsible, you could be forever barred from making your claim against the governmental entity. So if you're hurt, you believe the city or the county or whatever it is somehow responsible, you need to make sure the appropriate notice is going to that governmental entity. And that's something that when we get involved, we send the necessary letter putting them on notice to preserve the claim. Okay, so what happens if you are in the unfortunate situation of an accident and you're a pedestrian or you're a bicyclist? Number one, you got to seek medical treatment, right? If you're hurt, that's the biggest priority. Obviously, somebody, hopefully, if it's you and you're conscious and everything, you need to call 911, you need to get the police there. But otherwise, if you're seriously hurt, probably somebody's calling 911. Witnesses, photos, all of that is crucial because, again, this could go down the road. It could become a lawsuit. You just never know. And you've got to make sure you're going to have the evidence necessary to establish who was at fault, who was involved, all of those things. So again, critical is photographs, any witnesses that saw what happened. I can't stress it enough. And you can't just solely rely on a police report because sometimes they're not accurate. Sometimes they're incomplete. Sometimes there are witnesses that the police didn't get any information from. And so you need to do your best to make sure if somebody's there, they say they saw it, you get their information so you can follow up with them later. And the other thing is this, let's say you're on a bicycle, your bike was damaged, your helmet was damaged, you might have damaged clothes, you might have something, whether it's a GPS type tracker, something that you had running, a wearable like an Apple Watch, and that data could become important. It could potentially show your speed, things like that, where it was exactly when you got hit. So all of these things are just important to keep in mind if you've been involved in an accident as a pedestrian or a bicyclist. And you always have to remember that delays in treatment or gaps in care can really harm a claim. If you come out of something and you're thinking, I'm probably okay, I can shake it off, whatever. But as it develops over time, the more time that goes by and you haven't sought out medical treatment, that gives insurance companies the ability to say, something doesn't add up here. It must not have been that bad of an accident or whatever that looks like. So if you think you're hurt, get medical treatment sooner rather than later. Look, if nothing comes of it down the road, fine. You got checked out, you found out that you were okay. But if you think you're hurt and you get checked out initially and you've made your complaints and they're documented, then even if a couple weeks goes by and you've tried to whatever, use ibuprofen and heat and all those things to feel better and recover, and it's just not working. Well, now when you show up at a doctor's office 3-4 weeks later, you had the initial documentation established. And so it's not like just out of the blue, all of a sudden you're hurt. So just keep all those things in mind. I will tell you that if you look at the news, the local news on a regular basis, you will pretty much weekly see some accident involving a bicyclist or involving a pedestrian. This is how frequent these things are. There was recently a Kansas City cyclist that was struck in an intersection. The driver was cited for inattention, and the hurt person, the cyclist, needed surgery. And these things happen all the time. And again, we see it within the last 6 months. We've resolved a claim for an injured pedestrian that was in the crosswalk and the person didn't see them and hit them and they had serious injury. Again, happens all the time. We get a lot of calls on those. Now, again, I've dealt with this in a prior episode, but for example, Kansas City, they have a Vision Zero initiative. These cities are trying to create friendlier roadways for those that are using the roadways outside of a vehicle. And so our governmental entities are working to try and prevent accidents, prevent injuries, and obviously a great thing. But again, there's been expansions here again in Kansas City of bike lanes and trying to reduce dangerous conditions and things like that. So as we go through May here, again, it's phenomenal. The weather's awesome, generally speaking now. Getting out and walking, riding your bike, what a great way to stay healthy. But again, you want to be safe about it, and you don't want to end up as a statistic, and you don't want to end up with serious injury and things like that. So we've got to just bring the focus in here for a minute and bring all sides to thinking about what are the best, safest ways to use the roadways. As drivers, remember this, look twice at intersections and when you're opening your doors if you're parked on the side of the road. Again, it's kind of like the carpenters say, measure twice, cut once. Same idea, right? Just take a little extra time, look twice before you make a turn at an intersection or you pull from a stop sign. Make sure there's nothing there. It's the same as with motorcycles. Bicyclists and pedestrians are harder to see, and just a little extra time, a little extra caution can help you see them and avoid an accident. Remember, if you've been hurt in an accident, you've got to know your rights, and you don't want to wait necessarily to get legal help if you're in that situation. A personal injury lawyer like myself, we get involved. We take all the necessary steps to preserve evidence, to notify anybody that might be responsible for the accident, things like that. We're going to jump on it. We're going to make sure that all loose ends are tied up so that you have a solid claim against whoever might be at fault for this accident. We'll link some important sites to help you learn more about bicycle and pedestrian safety. I'd encourage you to check that out. And again, just enjoy yourself, get out there, enjoy the weather, be healthy, and be safe.